if you're new to the channel, or to me in general, this is actually the second version of Team Ranker for Season 2 that I've done. If you haven't seen the Sinister Cup video, don't. It's pretty bad. But I did fix the audio problem, and actually it's probably worth checking out. There's some interesting stuff there. But I also changed around the model a little bit, so you can see the names of the Pokemon. Very nice quality of life improvement there. But also I'm looking at roles like leads and secondary mons, as well as some counters. And I'm looking at just a verbose version of the original model. So, without further ado, let's get into this version of the model. I would also like to point out that I've set up a website. I'll link this wherever I link the video. But this has a static version of the model here just in a PDF, so you don't have to set anything up. You just got to go to the website and you can check out all the data that I've got. I'll also include a drive folder that will include all of the data and the code that you need to set this up for yourself if you want to open it up and change some things up. And if you do so, you'll get something that looks a little bit like this. I'm using Julia Box, which is an online version of Julia. The whole thing I've migrated to Julia instead of using some weird combination of Google Drive and Julia, just keeping it all in one place. So I already went ahead and ran everything here. So essentially at the beginning, I just grab some packages, read data, etc., etc. And then we get into the model itself. So I've already explained a little bit of how the model works in a previous video, but the important things here are, as a data science person, I've made a lot of simplifying assumptions, some of which I think are accurate to how PvP in Pokemon works, and some of which I think are a little inaccurate, but enough balance so that it still remains an accurate model, with a little uncertainty, of course. The big ones being that I don't include switch mechanic. That includes a whole mess of player decisions and game theory and a whole bunch of things that I don't want to go into right now, but might in the future. One of the ones where it's a little accurate to PvP, in my opinion, is that the Pokemon in the second position is the same as the Pokemon in the third position. So that basically means that if you see a team later and it's like Suicune, Alolan Ninetales, Alolan Marowak, that's going to be the exact same thing as Suicune, Alolan Marowak, Alolan Ninetales, and so that's just not included in the model. Another inaccuracy in the assumptions is that each mon gets one shield, but again, that's one of those balanced versions, so where you have 3 shields and your opponents have 3 shields, and I don't have to worry about when to shield. It's just you shield on each Pokemon. All right, but with those minor disclaimers aside, let's get into the model. I got to scroll down a little bit. I calculated all of that. I've actually got it down from the early model took about 8 hours to run. This is down to 13 seconds, and I'm actually getting more output this time. So some minor speed improvements have been made. All right, so the first thing that we can characterize this each team by is the number of wins. I think this is a pretty solid statistic, something that you should probably look for, in my opinion. How many teams am I going to win against out of teams of 3? So this distribution is interesting to me. The old one was pretty Gaussian, but this has this giant tail here, and then this is not exactly Gaussian on this side either. So we're looking at an interesting distribution here. I'm not sure what that says about the cup in general. Just, it's a little different. But we've also just got everything in a table. If you are familiar with the old model, you'll now notice that everything is labeled, and you can also see the names of the team, which is very nice. But yeah, our top team here is that aforementioned team, Suicune, Alolan Ninetales, Alolan Marowak, which is winning 11,236 times out of 12,180, which I believe is 92%. And so this outputs the top 30, and then you can pull from that table however many down you want. I've actually pulled the best and the worst team, so definitely the best being the Suicune, Alolan Ninetales, Alolan Marowak, and then the worst actually ends up being Licky, Weavile, and Pachirisu, and then I've just plotted those histograms here. So 1500 is your win-loss cutoff, and so this is our best team here, very solidly centered around 2000-ish area, with very little teams below that loss threshold, and then Licky, Weavile, and Pachirisu is almost the exact opposite. We'll see time and again throughout this model that Licky is just not a great Pokemon to go with, which I don't think comes as a big surprise to many, but it was ranked fairly high on PvPoke. And then this list here is if I average all of the Mons teams together. So every team that Suicune appears in, average all of those together, and then rank those. So our top 6 Mons that we've got here are Suicune, Alolan Ninetales, Alolan Marowak, Umbreon, Vaporeon, and Hippowdon. A lot of these top 5 are not all that surprising. Well, I'd say Alolan Marowak has not been getting as much attention as the other 4, but I could be wrong. I haven't looked much into that. But definitely Hippowdon. It was mentioned in the Nifty or Thrifty article pretty favorably. But I haven't seen a whole lot of chatter about Hippowdon, which I think is interesting. Definitely Alolan Sandslash has been up there, and Donphan and Alolan Raticate. But there's some interesting results up here, and these are taking in team of 3 considerations. And at the bottom of this, we'll see Licky by a good margin is just worse than a lot of the other in the top 30. Yeah. And if we plot the average number of wins versus the PvPoke ranking, so just 1 through 30 on the x-axis here, and then the number of wins, that's that list from earlier, we can see a pretty solid negative trend. Like the PvPoke rankings are generally going to give you a rough approximation of how good they're going to fit within this model. But definitely there's some ones that don't fit as well, such as the Hippowdon over here that was ranked 27th, and Licky, which is ranked 23rd. And so I don't think that it's all too surprising that it's not a perfect correlation. I don't think many people go to PvPoke and say, all right, my team is the first Pokemon, the second Pokemon, and the third Pokemon. And this histogram is just comparing if you were going to do that. And so this dark-colored team is the one starting with Umbreon, whereas this blue team is the team that my model has predicted here. All right, so let's move on to a different metric. This is the average score metric. So this is pretty much the same idea as the number of wins, except instead of looking at the number of times you get above the score of 1500, I'm just looking for the average score itself. So we're putting a more emphasis on winning by a lot or losing by a lot, as opposed to just winning or losing. And there are arguments for both ways. I personally prefer number of wins, but I could definitely see this. So our number 1 team from earlier is now number 2. It has been taken over by Suicune, Vaporeon, Alolan Marowak. While I'm on the subject of Suicune and Vaporeon, it's interesting to note that they are in the same team as this top one. Initially, when looking at this model, I was wondering if Suicune and Vaporeon are just the same Pokemon with, or the same role, but with different Pokemon, and they just happen to be ranked higher. But I think by the fact that they appear on so many top-ranked teams together, I think they definitely occupy different roles. Or the Water Suicune Vaporeon role, if such a thing exists, is just good enough to have 2 on your team. That's the other possibility there. Some interesting picks here. Donphan being in the 4th. Lots of Alolan Marowak. Ursaring is in this 8th best team. for it in the 10th best team. Some Grand Bull there. Lots of interesting choices within the average score. Oh, and then Piloswine comes in just barely in the top 30. And then again, I'm just comparing the best and worst. In this case, it's Suicune, Vaporeon, Alolan Marowak versus Licky Licky, Mamoswine, Pachirisu. Pretty similar histograms there. And then we've got the list. You'll notice the top 6 are exactly the same. They just are in a different order. I think Vaporeon is ranked a little higher in this one. Yeah. A little change there, but not a whole lot. Again, if we compare this versus PvPoke, we get a similar downward correlation, but again, not incredibly strong, which is to be expected. But if we do compare average score versus number of wins, we get a pretty tight line here, with the weird outliers being Licky Licky and Suicune, which are well below and above the pack on a number of reasons. So the next few sections here I encourage you to look at. I'm not going to cover them incredibly deeply here because they don't matter as much when it comes to picking a team. So variance is how wide the spread is, as opposed to a tightly distributed one. I think that's more easily seen if we look at the graph itself. So the most variant graph is Nidoking, Ursaring, Sandslash, and that's just an incredibly wide distribution with this weird 2 curves. Not really particularly sure what's up with that. And then, of course, the opposite of that being the least variant is Licky Licky, Miltank, and Persian, which is pretty tightly centered, though not tightly centered around a good number to be tightly centered around. And then we can rank these, of course, and if you compare them to the number of wins, there's really not much of a correlation at all. Same with skewness, except skewness is actually determined in a little bit of a different way. So it's not more skewed or less skewed. It's skewed in one direction versus skewed in another direction. So if we look at the best and worst team here, they're skewed in their separate directions, which is, I guess, sort of good when it comes to choosing your team, but they end up not being very good compared to if you're just looking at number of wins or average score. We can sort those as well. And there is a correlation, I guess. I feel bad calling that a correlation, but it's sort of there. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily choose that as a metric to choose your team by, but I've included it anyway. And then there's kurtosis, which is the contribution from the tails. And so this is all tails, I guess. And then this is no tail contribution or very little tail contribution. Again, probably not a great metric to choose your team by, but it exists. All right, and then this is new even to the Sinister Cup model that I had. So this little algorithm here is what I've deemed cleverly the max score algorithm. It takes a team of 6 and it says, all right, against every single other team from the top 30, which is 12,180, I'm going to choose the best team of 3 from my team of 6 to go against it. And so I've just plotted here the top 6 team that my algorithm chose. In this case, again, the number of wins and the average score, the top 6 were the same. So these are the top 6 by either metric, but I did go off of the number of wins for both this and the bottom. And then these middle 2, the blue and the green, are for if you just put in the top 6 PvPoke numbers. Like my team is the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th ranked PvPoke team, or my team is the 25th through 30th ranked PvPoke team. And as you can see, The best team is a little bit better than the top 6 ranked PvPoke teams, and the bottom team is significantly worse than the bottom 6 ranked PvPoke team. Though, to be fair, they do have Licky Licky, which gives them the advantage on being bad. So here, we're looking at the team again. This is the top 6 team. And you can change this model in the editable version. Obviously, you can't change the PDF, but you can change it in the files that I will include as well. And this is a histogram of all of the 3-mon team possibilities. There's a lot going on here, so I'm gonna break that up a little bit. So yeah. We're going to sort them by number of wins, just as earlier, but this is only going to include the teams that are on our top 6. So if you've chosen your top 6, the way I use this is if you've chosen your top 6, then you plug it into this, and then you say, all right, when I go to a tournament, these are going to be some pretty good teams to choose. And maybe even put them in your 5 slots, though I would keep at least one open so you can put in a random team, because I had trouble with that. The Sinister Cup, I just put in the top 5, and then I kept changing the 5th one, and I was like, this isn't even an accurate name for it anymore. But yeah. And then here's the best and the worst from among that lot. I mean, this is the worst 3-mon team from the best 6-mon team, or the best 6 mons in a team. I'm not declaring that that's the best 6-mon team at this point. I'm still looking at various algorithms to try and find that. Versus the best of the top 6 mons. So Vaporeon, Umbreon, Hippowdon, not going to be your best team. Your best team being Suicune, Alolan Ninetales, Alolan Marowak, which just so happens to be the best team in the entire meta, according to this model. And then I can do the same thing by average score. So in this case, the worst one is Hippowdon, Umbreon, Vaporeon, and the best one is Suicune, Vaporeon, Alolan Marowak. All right, so this section determines counters for a 3-mon team. So here I've plugged in the best team according to this model: Suicune, Alolan Ninetales, and Alolan Marowak. And so the best counters here are a little obvious, at least at the start. We've got some electric types, obviously, Minun and Pachirisu. But also Lickitung is a good counter, and Bibarel, which I was really hoping would end up in the top 6 of this model, but unfortunately it did not. And so that just tells you, which Pokemon should you look out for and maybe not use this particular team, or if I'm trying to counter the best team in the meta, maybe I should include a Minun or a Lickitung on my team instead. Now, of course, Vaporeon is 5th, so there's still counters among those top 6 to this team, but still. All right, and then the final little section that I've got here is roles. Oh, that's okay. I've been logged out, but that's okay. I've already loaded everything, so it'll work just fine. All right, so this was actually a specific request from somebody. I added the leads and secondary roles to my model. So here I've put all of the teams that a Pokemon is the lead for, and then average them together. And then this is the list sorted by score. So Suicune is your best lead according to this, Alolan Ninetales being 2nd, Alolan Marowak being 3rd, and you'll actually see that the top 6 are the top 6 in the lead spot, which is nice. It's a little versatile as to which lead you can choose. And then we can do the same thing by number of wins. And actually here, Alolan Sandslash does beat out Hippowdon in terms of being the best lead by number of wins. And then we can do the same thing for secondary mons. So again, remember the 2nd and 3rd mon that you put in don't matter for this model. So these are Pokemon that are the best if they are in the second or third slot. And so by average score, we've got our top 6 in the top 6. Oh, no. Our top 5 our top 6 with the exception of Umbreon in the top 5. And then Umbreon gets outpaced by both Donphan and Granbull, which is interesting because Umbreon leads are not all that high in the model, but Umbreon is included among the top 6, which is interesting. And then if we go by number of wins, Umbreon does end up being in the top 6, and this is just the top 6 from earlier. And then we can plot the secondary number of wins on this axis versus the lead number of wins. And so there are some Pokemon that go above the line, and that means they're better secondary mons than lead mons. And there are some Pokemon that go below the line, but it's actually a pretty tight distribution here, again with Licky Licky and Suicune being the exceptions. Alright, so that's how this model works. Makes some interesting conclusions. I think the Hippowdon conclusion is very interesting. From the looks of it, I wouldn't necessarily call it off-meta, but it's definitely not one of the ones that people are most considering from what I've seen. So I think that's interesting. Well, that's the model that I've got. Feel free to play around with it. Let me know what you find out. Let me know if you have any suggestions. And again, I've got a static version of this on a website that I'll link to wherever I link this video. And you can also suggest features from within this website. All right, thank you.